Hi everyone, my name is Sierra Kenworthy, and today I'll be discussing the business continuity plan for Land and Sea Aviation Alaska LLC. Today in my presentation, I'll discuss what Land and Sea offers as a business, the airport that they operate out of, which is a Class D airport, also known as Merrill Field Airport, information that I collected and how it was collected, components of my BCP, and in closing, I'll kind of go over the appendices that I recommended to evaluate the business continuity plan and ensure its success. So to give you kind of an idea of what Land and Sea LLC is it's a aviation company located at the Wings of Freedom hangar at Merrill Field Airport. They offer aircraft rental, instruction, ground school, testing, licensing, and really any general rating that can be acquired for small aviation aircraft in Alaska. They are one of the premier destinations to learn, all the way from a private pilot's license, which is what I'm currently doing, to a multi-engine rating for a commercial pilot license. Where they are located is Merrill Field, a Class D airspace, but what's really notable about Merrill Field is that it shares airspace with a Class B airspace, which is the Anchorage International Airport. And then on the other side is actually the Air Force Base, which is the Elmendorf Airfield. What's really important is that the FAA has regulations regardless of airspace, but there are extra regulations at Merrill that really have to be accounted for and have to be routinely expressed because there are so many aircraft coming in and out of this airport. There's actually a lot of risk, which is why there's a very small margin of error, which I will discuss in my BCP. In general, in the aviation industry, we focus on that small margin of error and making it smaller with every procedure. There's a checklist for everything you could possibly think of. There are routine tests that have to be done. There's knowledge that has to be accounted for, whether that's through testing or an oral exam or a check ride. And then also there are several sources to find information on traffic patterns, on radio communications, and on general flight patterns for places like Merrill. So how my information was collected was primarily through interviewing staff members. I interviewed the president and owner, Key Ma, who's also a flight instructor at Land and Sea. I interviewed their chief pilot, Brandon Avola, and I also mainly worked with their office manager, who's really the brains of the operation, and that's Marina Doherty. Marina also has flight experience, but more so she's in charge of their QuickBooks, their scheduling, their billing, really the key business components and maintenance that goes into making sure this is an actual business that can bring in profit and can ensure customer satisfaction. So going through my plan, the key business components and functions that have to be maintained to ensure the viability of the company is testing, aircraft rental and aircraft instruction, billing, and classroom work, So my business continuity plan kind of goes into secondary sites for these operations and moving aircraft to different airport regions. So for offsite testing and classroom facilities, I chose the Medallion Foundation. The Medallion Foundation is where simulator testing is done and simulator practice. So for different ratings, you're going to have to be in a simulator just because it's to ensure that there isn't an aircraft incident whenever you're learning different procedures. A really great example is your instrument rating, where a student isn't even looking out the window. They're only looking at the instruments within the airplane. Obviously, this is very risky if a student was doing this on their own in an airplane because there is other air traffic. So this is done at a simulated area like Medallion Foundation. Medallion Foundation can be used as the secondary testing site because they have testing capabilities and the testing documents that are given by the FAA. The only downside of this secondary testing center is that Land and Sea will lose the revenue that comes in from testing fees. However, they have flight simulation capabilities, internet, PCs for documentation, letters, and CC mail, aviation course materials, sectional charts and flight plan templates, testing capabilities, and classroom space for classroom instruction. For property protection, protecting the facilities, aircrafts, and vital records is essential to restoring Land and Sea Aviation Alaska LLC's operations once an emergency has occurred. And what I have listed in my BCP is all of the aircraft that are present at the Wings of Freedom hangar, the fueling center that is located on site, and also the different desktops that are in the testing center within the actual hangar space. Fire information is distributed to CFIs, students, and any aircraft renters, and they are expected to follow procedures that are mandated and regulated by the Federal Aviation Administration. For recovery objectives and time, the key recoveries that need to be focused on to ensure core business components can be continued is fueling, testing, aircraft parking, and billing and invoicing. The recovery point objective for on-site fueling is 1 week. While we are recovering fuel on site, aircraft will be expected to taxi across runway 25 to Crowley Fueling Center. How this will be tracked is that the charge to a student's credit card will be credited on their billing service, so that'll be money that's taken away from their hours, just so that they aren't incurring additional costs that weren't an issue before the crisis happened. For testing, our recovery for on-site testing is 1 month, and why we wouldn't just transfer it to Medallion Foundation is it is a source of revenue that they would want to have come back to their site because it is, again, a source of revenue. Aircraft parking, obviously we have to have a place the aircraft can take off. So if there is excessive airport closure at Merrill due to military operations or runway damage, we would transfer them to Birchwood Airport, which is in Chugiak. There are several realtors that sell the spaces at that airport, but we would use Alaska Airmen simply because they've worked with them before. For billing and invoicing, what's really great about FAA regulations is you're required to log plane hours and student hours. So what we would use is these student hours and these plane hours to calculate based on the standard hourly rate for aircraft rental and for instruction to bill the customers. We would also send these invoices and then do everything essentially by hand. Also, if Flight Schedule Pro, the platform that they currently use, wasn't available, we would go to QuickBooks where we can do billing, or we would do it by hand because we have all of those physical records. For training, all certified flight instructors will be responsible for instructing students on emergency situations, locations of fire extinguishers in aircraft, and emergency procedures in and around aircraft. CFIs will instruct students using materials provided on emergency landings and situations in the Federal Aviation Administration Handbook, Section 8083, Chapter 17. As a student, I can verify that these are regularly presented to students. You'll be in the air over the practice field and your instructor will pull your throttle out, essentially taking away all the power of your airplane and say, okay, what would you do? And you have to go through several checklists that are provided by the FAA to make sure you're making a safe emergency landing. And the thoroughness that is required to even get into an aircraft is the reason why the margin of error is so small. For our testing, we included the pre-flight checklist, the run-up checklist, the in-flight checklist, and then finally the landing checklist and the post-landing checklist, or the shutdown checklist. So while it's not a form of testing or training that we created, it is what's going to ensure safety and viability in an airplane for students and for certified flight instructors. For training, that's included in the Wings of Freedom hangar in case of a fire. There are fire exits that are designated in the classroom areas, and how this training will be conducted is that there will be an annual walkthrough with the flight instructors of Wings of Freedom, of Land and Sea Alaska in Wings of Freedom hangar. Well, they'll walk through and say, if you were in this classroom, this is the route you would take to get your students safely out of the building. If you're in this testing center, this is the route you would take to make sure that your students are safely out of the building. Things that have to be accounted for is that there is a hangar in the hangar that supplies parking space for some personal airplanes, motorcycles, and various other aircraft and mechanic components that would have to be accounted for if you're trying to run through, or if there was smoke. There are things that could be in the way that could cause even more damage or could cause an even bigger fire that have to be addressed and recognized in this emergency evacuation plan and in safety planning. The appendices I really wanted to go through were the core function review sheet. And examples of that is payroll is performed at QuickBooks. And for the recovery strategy, if the system was down, payment and payroll would be manually tracked on paper documentation that's already in the office. For plane storage, the Wings of Freedom hangar, if it were to be inoperable, we would secure spots at various airports and surrounding areas, but preferably what we would do is that there is a large parking area with available spots at Merrill Field across runway 25 and runway 18, and that's where we would park our planes. Upon securing a spot, after interviewing Marina and some other flight instructors, and honestly, my father, who's also a pilot, it would take about 3 days just securing those spots and then transporting them. Getting the proper trucks to come and load the airplanes to whatever spot they need to be taken to. It would take about 3 days, which is pretty standard considering during inclement weather, there'll be several IFR days. And what IFR days is, there's a required visibility and required cloud coverage minimum that allows for clear flights where students can be in the air. If it is IFR, which is the unideal conditions, then no one can even leave the airport, which is pretty standard in Alaska during times of storms or if there's fires. So it wouldn't be a huge hindrance or a discouragement to customers. For plane fueling, we have on-site fueling at Land and Sea, but planes would be fueled again at Crowley, located across Merrill Field, and open to all companies, and we could receive the invoices for that. Or students could charge their credit cards and then bring that credit information to the office to be calculated on their invoicing and billing. For information systems, a thing I haven't really touched on that I'll get into more in depth about is Flight Schedule Pro. Flight Schedule Pro is a platform that's not only used by Land and Sea, but also a lot of companies in Alaska. A lot of small aircraft companies use them because they're friendly to customers and to office administrators. It allows for scheduling for planes, for instructors. It shows maintenance hours, so that can be tracked as well, just so you know when a plane will be in maintenance and cannot be in the air. And while finding a new system, this documentation of hours, CFI scheduling, and invoicing would be done on paper at Land and Sea, simply because those records are already being recorded, whether it's the individual aircraft log or the pilot logbook. Those different types of resources can be utilized as a backup system. For training drills and exercises, the student drills and reviews will be conducted monthly. Employee orientation will be when an employee is hired, but usually that's in the months of January and August. For community media orientation, that's actually something that is outlined by the NTSB, which is the National Transport Safety Board. They outline how to reach out to family members of those in an aircraft incident, different legal operations that need to be conducted, and how to not only report to the NTSB and the FAA, but also to local media sources. The walkthrough drill will be conducted annually in the first month of January, and the evacuation drill, which will be part of the walkthrough drill, is also going to be conducted in January. For assessment and audit of this plan, that will be conducted in the first business week of January, and the questions we will be asking are we in regulation with the FAA and NTASB for all emergency procedures regarding aircraft and aircraft maintenance? Does the plan reflect lessons learned from drills and actual events? Do CFIs understand their respective responsibilities, and have new instructors been trained? Does the plan reflect changes in FAA requirements, which does happen? Have procedures been adapted following these changes? Are photographs and other records of facility assets up to date? Is our curriculum attaining its training objectives for safety and prevention? Have the hazards in the facility changed? Are the names, titles, and telephone numbers in the plan current? And are steps being taken to incorporate emergency management order into the facility process? In addition to a yearly audit, Land and Sea Aviation Alaska LLC will evaluate and modify the plan at these times, which is after each training drill or exercise, after each emergency, when student count increases, when FAA regulations or procedures have been changed, when policies procedures change in response to NTASB findings, and we will always remember to brief personnel on changes to these plans. While the margin of error is very small for aircraft incidents, the actual events that progress are detrimental. 97% of all aviation fatalities occur in small aircraft, and that was found by the NTASB. Alaska Land and Sea Aviation LLC has never lost a plane or a in-flight instructor, a student, or a renter because of their thorough processes, and that plan is continually in effect. They are very meticulous about making sure everyone is instructed on how to handle aircraft, and I hope they continue to do so. As a student, this business is passionate about what they do, and I'm very excited to see where they go in the future. Thank you.